was I was involved in my first prayer circle.
First evangelical prayer circle.
First
Right?
evangelical prayer circle, yeah.
Or at least Christian prayer circle, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so I was unaware of that it was going to happen. It was a surprise sort of jump in.
No one telegraphed it to you. It just kind of started happening.
But before I knew it, I was on my knees, and the pastor put her hands on my chest.
Uh-huh.
So do I?
All of a sudden, your personal bubble is being invaded.
And everyone started holding hands around me, and I go, "Oh my, am I going to get touched by everybody?" So I was like, I don't know.
This is Crossing Phase, the podcast featuring a Christian and a Muslim talking religion and politics. What could possibly go wrong? Your co-hosts for this adventure are me, Matt Hawkins, a once policy director for the Southern Baptist Convention, and my New York Muslim friend, the multi-talented John Pinna. Show notes, bios, and all our social media links are available at crossingphase.com.
This is the first episode of a pilot season, which, as far as we can tell, it's the only podcast co-hosted by an American evangelical and an American Muslim. We intend to lend our commentary to religious headlines across the globe and share our own multi-faith experiences. Some good, some bad, some ugly, some funny. John Pinna, welcome to our first episode.
Thank you for having me. It's nice for us to be sitting and chatting with each other officially.
Officially, we've been talking about this idea for many months, maybe a year or more, haven't we? Trying to get in front of the microphone, and this is finally the day.
Yeah, these are the birthed from conversations that we've had over the course of our 10-year professional history, where we've I've called you on a bunch of things to see what does where does this sit with the evangelical community, and you've pinged me on the reverse.
Right.
So we felt that there might be a compelling argument for us to share our conversations with others.
Yeah, I agree. And we can talk about the conversations, or I think we can just get into it and start having these conversations. And I know I've enjoyed learning more about American Muslims in particular from you and your graciousness in fielding my North American white boy questions endlessly. And so I look forward to more of that. And maybe our conversations will be of value to listeners.
So we've been friends now together and colleagues for 10 years, and you and I admittedly have never asked you to come to the masjid with me, or mosque.
Yeah.
And you moved to Tennessee some time ago, a couple of years ago. So you had your first mosque experience.
I did. I'm kind of surprised and frankly a little embarrassed that I didn't visit a mosque while up in the D.C. area. But I did in Nashville recently. It was following. It was in the week or so following the New Zealand mosque attack, which was naturally a horrific tragedy. But an evangelical pastor friend of mine and I and some Jewish folks from a couple of the Nashville synagogues gathered and went to a mosque in downtown Nashville and gathered with them for prayers, and they were open and invited us in, and it was a pretty fascinating experience. I had not done that before, and it was enlightening, and it was interesting to watch. It was a very diverse gathering, but I think this is some of the stuff you and I want to talk about.
Let's hear about you. You were mentioning because it's.
I had a little bit of an awkward moment, and I think the value of this podcast is going to be teasing out awkward moments in multi-faith interaction, and I certainly had mine. So I learned a bit of a lesson, and I also learned a little bit of from you, a little bit of a theological debate between Islamic traditions. And so it was approaching the time when the service was about to begin, and I realized that I should probably go use the restroom before it got too long, and I didn't want to interrupt. Didn't want to go have to excuse myself in the middle of the prayer service, and so I went back out into the lobby, keeping in mind in that context I had already taken my shoes off. And so I entered the restroom, and again, evangelical American, first time in a mosque, all of a sudden not sure what to do because I recognize I have my shoes off for entry into the Islamic Center, but then I'm entering the restroom where also the neighborhood, many of the neighborhood men were doing the ritual cleansing, and where there are also stalls around. And so I'm all of a sudden torn because I don't know whether to go back out and put my shoes on to go use the restroom.
Right.
Or the option I ultimately chose was to put on one of the pair of the flip-flops that were at the door and then go use the restroom.
Right. So
and
generally...
then wash my hands. And so all I have to say, I obviously should have just asked someone and pleaded ignorance about what my protocol should have been. But it's reflective of our conversation and relationship. And you were gracious enough to lend me insight into that predicament.
And then, and just for people to know that, so you go into a masjid or mosque before you go to the masala, which is where the prayers are conducted, and where the khutbah is, where the imam will give his speech, which is the khutbah is like a homily. I don't know. What do you guys call them? I know in Catholicism they call it a homily. What do you?
Yeah.
What do you guys call it?
Most of the time it's sermons, but we have a homily that tends to be. Homilies tend to be just shorter sermons. They're a little more devotional in nature. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes versus 30 minutes or more for a sermon. But there are no hard lines around it.
So the mosque is a structure, or the masjid is the structure, and then the masala is where the carpet that you step onto, you take your shoes off and step onto it, and that's the prayer area, and then the khutbah is the sermon that the imam will give. And so you're supposed to do ablution, which is called wudu or wazu, depending on where you're from. Wudu is the ritual of washing hands, face, and feet, and certain parts of the body, so that you're all as a ritualistic cleaning. Just like when I know that the Catholic priests will do that when they will rub their hands with oils and so forth. So so you did you do wudu? Did you do wazu? Did you do the ablution? Did anybody show you how to do that?
No one showed me how to do that. No.
Okay, so
no, we were just kind of in the background.
Sure. Yeah, so there's that, and I mean, before you step into the masala, you're supposed to have that done, right? So, and then you don't have to if you're obviously not Muslim, and there's no really hard fast rules. Although maybe some of my colleagues would suggest that there should be hard fast rules.
Sure.
And then you went to the bathroom. And then there's usually what's called chapel or flip-flops that you can put on so that you don't ruin your ablution, right? So you can walk on the floor. And the controversial part from our conversation was I feel really funny doing wudu in the bathroom. Although a lot of my colleagues, and my fellow members, Muslim members, whether they're Sunni or Shia, will say, "Oh, it's no problem because in the bathroom you have stalls, and so there's no commingling of any kind of dirtiness between it being a bathroom and it being and you're trying to do ablution." Now, if you go, I was just in Istanbul during Ramadan, and of course there's a special sort of faucet spouts where you do your wudu, and it's not a bathroom, it's outside, and you ritualistically wash, and then you go into the mosque, the masjid. Yeah. And in America,
it seems like a far more streamlined and clear process to me.
Right, and so I always felt funny that we're doing this ablution. But we're doing it in a bathroom, and I certainly can smell what's going on.
Sure.
So the stalls don't preclude. There's no barrier. So I always felt funny about it, and I just had this conversation with my friend at the Adams Center in Sterling, Virginia, and I said, well, why can't we just have a section to just do it outside? And so there's people like me who will do wudu before we go to the masjid, And so it still counts as long as we don't go to the bathroom or do something that makes us unpack. What pak is the term for cleanliness. So and then you just take off your shoes and you go in. But I go through the same thing, and usually my problem is that I'll go to the bathroom and then there won't be chapel that's my size. It's all for kids or something. So like I just gotta.
The ones I had to use were fairly small too. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to put like a toe in and then balance your way through.
Just kind of sliding through.
Yeah, and and if anybody's ever washed themselves in a bathroom after a being on a long trip or being traveling, it's not easy to take off your shoes and socks, and the tile floor is hot lava, so you got to be careful to balance things while you're doing everything. So, but a lot of masjids have an area to conduct, we'll do downstairs or in an area that is clean, that's not a bathroom. But like I said, personally, and this is a personal preference, there's no hard, fast rules, which is why people say you can do it in a bathroom. And I go, okay, I'm not going to argue with you, but I just don't feel that that's right. And that doesn't mean that, just like no two Christians are the same, no two Muslims are the same in how they interpret their stuff. Yeah. So, so you toughed it out.
I toughed it out. I got through it, and it was a fascinating experience, and but one I definitely had to tell you about. and you too recently had your own awkward multi-faith experience in a more civic, kind of in a more civic capacity or more civic event. So I want you to tell listeners about that.
You want to know before we get into that, I'll tell you what my struggle was. Centered around the New Zealand occurrence. I went to the Jummah prayer, which is the Friday prayer. Friday is Sunday for Muslims, right? And that's your go to church day. And so I'm sitting at the Adams Center, and my struggle was I'd done wudu, and I'd taken off my shoes, went in and sat down and listened to the khutbah. And of course, was very thoughtful. Imam Majid, who's the imam for the Adams Center, was very thoughtful in his comments, and you can look at them online. But my problem is that the guy in front of me, his shoes were off, and he had 4 or 5 Band-Aids on those shoes, and I go, what's going on here? And it was such a big distraction because keep the sock on, buddy. I was really nervous, and it kept distracting me. And of course, I was telling some of my friends that were afterwards, they go, "You should have been concentrating on the foot and not the foot." And I go, it was staring at me, and I got it totally distracted me from the whole situation. So there just needs. I mean, do we need to put signage up that says if you have something on your foot, wear the sock. 2 is if you have a wound and there's a comedian called Sebastian Mascalano, and he is a Malascaco, I think his name is, and I'm mispronouncing it, who talks about how he's got this whole thing about people wearing Band-Aids in the pool. And how you got to drain the pool. He does a whole bit on that, and I just kept thinking of his bit, going, "This is if you have 4 or 5 Band-Aids on your foot, you need medical attention. You got to that used to be gone." So that totally distracted me from the khutbah on New Zealand, which is terrible. But so that was one of my experiences, and there's no hard fast rule on that. Do I say something to the guy? What do I do?
Socks are acceptable, right?
Socks are acceptable as long as you conduct as long as you do wudu. So some people will do. So it's ritual of washing of your hands 3, and then you do your face. Then you do your mouth, your nose, your face, and then the arm from the elbow down to the wrist. Arm, elbow down the wrist, and one of the key things, and then your head, then your feet, and you've got to get water between your fingers and between your toes. So some people will do it, and they'll do it over the socks. I don't really know how that works. But again, everybody needs to sort of figure out how they want to be a good Muslim, and I'm not going to say that that's being bad. It's just a different interpretation. But yeah, so my recent experience, so we had the National Day of Prayer, and I was part of a multiple sort of festivities that had happened. And that were happening around the National Day of Prayer, and all kinds of other interesting sort of multi-faith activities. One was I was involved in my first prayer circle.
First evangelical prayer circle.
First evangelical prayer circle,
or at least Christian prayer circle, right?
Yeah. So I didn't, and so I was unaware of that it was going to happen. It was a surprise sort of jump in.
No one telegraphed it to you. It just kind of started happening.
Well, I was with a bunch of evangelicals that were really passionate about the day and what was happening, because it was a series of 3 or 4 days that everybody was getting together around the National Prayer Day, and there was a big events happening all over. And so John, you've been involved in interfaith for this amount of time, and really want to thank and bless you. And I said, okay. And I just thought it was going to be like a Catholic sort of, the sign of the cross, maybe a ring, the kissing. I don't know. Maybe there was going to be a little bit of that. I had no idea. But before I knew it, I was on my knees, and the pastor put her hands on my chest. And I sort of said, put me down, and I didn't know. First and foremost,
I didn't know what to do.
I said first and foremost, I was like, what's happening here? And then I'm kneeling, and I have a woman in front of me with her hands on my chest, and my breath is going into her cleavage.
Oh gosh!
So it's a very erotic moment, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. So do I?
All of a sudden, your personal bubble is being invaded.
And then I said to myself, where do my hands can't possibly go on her chest, right? So do I keep on my sides? And everyone started holding hands around me, and I go, am I going to get touched by everybody? So I was like, I don't know. So I just kind of went through it, and it was a very thoughtful sort of blessing and acknowledgement of who I am and some of the work that I've done. And it was great. I had a wonderful moment in time, but my New York instincts are this, like, I don't breathe too hard into her dress, and try to not. It's not.
Where's this heading?
Well, that's the other thing. I said, I didn't want to, commit a hate crime. Going, all right, we need to kind of wrap this up soon, But in the same respect, I'm on my knees, and everyone's lording over me. Hands are on my chest, and I'm sitting there going, does everybody get a shot at me? Does this happen? I don't know. So I'm part of a lot of net sort of prayer calls where faith calls where we'll spend 20 minutes going through prayers on the front end and prayers on the back end, and we end up having 10 minutes to talk about the subject.
Not entirely foreign territory for you.
Right. So I didn't know if everybody was going to have a say or jump in. So that was my first sort of incident that happened. And it was nothing bad. It was I just was unaware in a moment's notice. We said, we're going to say a prayer. Okay. And then hands were on my chest, and I go, okay, what does that mean? And then I was like, maybe this is the laying of hands. I was like, am I being healed? So then I asked that afterwards. They're like, no, you weren't healed. And I'm like, what's that about? And they go, well, it's a really long, and there's certain moments where we have to really make sure that when it comes to evil, it's rooted out. And I go, I don't know what that means. What is that? Does that mean? And I was like, I don't know if I should ask the question. And of course, I'm going to ask you the question. The laying of hands. How invasive is that one?
Right.
So, but that was my first experience that was new, and it wasn't. It was just. I was a little bit nervous about it, and there was a component about it where I just didn't know. I was disoriented trying to figure out what would become next, rather than focusing on the words and what was going on. Yeah. Because it was a strange, one of those strange moments where you're trying to assess and respect and participate, but if you don't know how to participate, what do you do? So,
yeah. Well, it sounds like your reaction and participation was gracious and an otherwise awkward.
But now it's out. Now it's out.
Awkward. So, now it's out.
So that was the first incident. Yeah.
So to my Christian brothers and sisters, if you're interested in extending a prayer for or a blessing for or even laying on hands to a Muslim friend, give them a little heads up about what is about to happen, right? Just a little genial explanation about what is and what's not going to happen, right? That would be helpful.
I mean, it's lucky that I trusted everybody and everything else.
Sure.
I feel like our relationship between me and this pastor is elevated to a point where it was very personal, very in a weird, intimate. And I don't know, I was just like, but it was all normal to everyone. So when they left and everybody started going towards what, the ceremony function, whatever they were doing, I kind of was like, oh, well, are we all best friends now? What do we do now? We didn't exchange numbers. There was no dinner involved. So but it was a very thoughtful and acknowledgement of some of the work that I've done in our relationship and stuff like that. But there was a few moments there I kind of got nervous about where we were and what was going on. And then the second element was I've heard of I've interacted with some of the evangelical communities, but never had I been through. I don't think I've experienced a service, a real sort of evangelical service, and I don't know if the word Bible thumping. I don't know if it's pejorative or not. I've heard that before, but I never understood exactly what it was. Sure. So, And so I'd gone through, there was this sort of service. So we're here in this multi-faith national prayer sort of service and of all these activities that are going on. And the pastor got up and started saying this, really revving up the crowd, about, things are stated in the Bible and in this passage, and things are moving, and something was ordained at this point, and things were really evolving. And so I was there with a bunch of Muslims, and people were behind us going, "Amen," and yeah, and we're all a little bit going, where's this going? Right. Where's this going right now? Are we gonna, and are we part of the group? Or
right.
We start.
Or are they just talking past you?
Yeah. And I was excited because I was like, yeah, I'm revved up. I want to start. I want to turn over a table. I want to, charge a hill. And so we're all revved up. And then all of a sudden, this guy gets up there and he says, "You all know the words to this song," and starts strumming this song. And so my first thing is I was all revved up to do something. I wanted to, paint a house, eat some ice cream, charge a hill, do something as a group and go nuts, And then this guy comes in and starts playing the guitar and singing a song. But his first thing in this multi-faith component is, you all know the words to this song. You've all heard this before. And I'm like, no. And so he sings the song, and everybody was pointing to the sky, and everybody was pushing the sky.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot. There's a lot of hands. Yeah. So in the motion, that motion of pushing the air, it's not a Muslim thing. There's a cultural thing where if someone comes in and we're having dinner and someone sort of pushes the air a little bit, and there's a guy and a girl that then you say, "Oh, are they fooling around?" So that's what it means. So I'm going
a little different context. Right?
So I'm like, clearly that's not what they're doing. It's clearly that has nothing to do with it. But some of us were looking around each other, kind of giggling a little bit. And then, but it was such a bipolar experience. We were motivated by the pastor to do something, and then on the other hand, there was this sort of mellow sort of petting with the music at the end, and I was going, why? We should be doing something. And then now that guy sort of calmed us down with his song, and of course the moment where he said, you all know this song, and it would have been nice if he said, this is a song that has to do with our relationship with God and Jesus and breath of God, that sort of thing, because there was something about the breath in the line. And in the chorus, this is the or said this is the chorus and this is what it means. That would have been nice. But we were just in the middle of it, much like the prayer circle, and we right in the middle of it and being respectful, but not knowing what's happening and around us.
So no objection necessarily to hearing a Christian song sung, but maybe a little more introduction for, say, the rabbis and the Hindus and the Muslims in the room, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I don't know what half the time what Joel Osteen is saying, but I do watch some of his stuff because he's so positive, So yeah, there was completely respectful to what's going on. And so anytime I feel bad, I'll turn on Joel Osteen because whatever I'm doing, I'm doing it right. He's got a story. So and I don't know where he sits in evangelical circles and where it falls. All I know is that. So I'm not against Christian music or the sermon that was given. It would seem very bipolar as an observation. We were really hot and ready to roll, and then this guy's melling us out, and then and then we didn't know the song. We didn't know it. And of course, if we don't know the words, we got to kind of. Okay, it's a chorus, so we got to kind of hear the words. Am I hearing the words right?
Am I going to sing something? If I decide to sing along, am I going to sing something that conflicts with my own convictions? Right.
Yeah. That song that says, "Give me the beat, boys, and sing my song." I thought for years it was "Give me the Beach Boys." I had no idea. So I don't want to. I commit a hate crime singing the wrong words now.
Right.
This has been Crossing Phase with John Pinna and Matt Hawkins, a podcast of Rolltop Productions. You can continue the conversation with us if you dare on Twitter via @MTHawk, @JTPinna, and @CrossingPhase. Love it or hate it, we'd appreciate your review of our program wherever you glean your favorite podcasts, especially in the iTunes Store. Music for this episode is provided courtesy Vajra. Show notes and an assortment of other information is available at crossingphase.com.
And it says that this is Moses' staff.
Oh.
What? So first of all, a little disappointed because I'm in the Charlton Heston Moses camp where it's supposed to be like taller than.
It's like 8 feet tall.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I was skeptical because of my movie knowledge. Right. Charlton Heston. But I'm saying clearly this can't possibly be. But sure enough, some nerds and some eggheads had done some research on this. They did PhDs and said this is most likely the staff.
Welcome to the pilot season of Crossing Phase, a podcast featuring a Christian and a Muslim talking religion and politics. What could possibly go wrong? Your co-hosts for this adventure are me, Matt Hawkins, a once policy director for the Southern Baptist Convention, and my New York Muslim friend, the multi-talented John Pinna. Show notes, bios, and all our social media links are available at crossingphase.fireside.fm. If our show captures your attention, there'll be information on later episodes about sponsorship opportunities. Here now is the pilot season of Crossing Phase.
Are we recording?
We are now. Welcome, Pinna.
All right. So, I got a few things on my mind, and you gotta bear with me because I'm in New York, so my accent is coming out. I hope I don't commit a hate crime.
You're in the homeland, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an issue, So I was trying to explain to my friends who are from my DC buddies.
Yeah.
I was just talking to guys at the White House, and we're chatting back and forth. And I go, look, if I start off the conversation with no offense, I could say whatever I want, and then if you react, it's no. I already said no offense. I don't understand what the problem is.
It's a get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
You're supposed to not have a problem with it.
Like, no offense, but your mother's ugly, and then they get mad at me, and they're like, what do you mean your mother's ugly? My mother's ugly. I go, I just said no offense. I just said that.
Let's move along.
So I just had this funny conversation this morning. It was really fun about that whole thing, and we're talking with people at state, in the main state. We're going back and forth, and of course, then my DC colleague is explaining that to the people at State, and no one's getting it. Yeah, so they're all kind of like, all right, let's Jesus nails.
Jesus
so I don't
nails?
know. Yeah, so I don't know if this is. I don't. Like I said, I'm a little nervous about saying it, but I know this is a safe space. But between you and I, the two of us, but the Jesus nails. So, what do you know about Jesus nails? And I don't know. Are they called Jesus nails?
Well, I'm not sure what we call them. We can call them Jesus nails for shorthand. Why not?
Okay. I mean, maybe they because there's crucifixion nails.
Crucifixion nails, right? Which
or
are
spikes.
There are not many.
Spikes. Right.
Many
and
from the what we call the New Testament era, or first century AD.
Well, you've seen Spartacus, right? The movie, and you know the history of Spartacus.
Right.
So there was an industry, I guess, of crucifixion during the Roman period, right?
Right.
So, but none of these spikes exist except for a few. And so I was in, I think it was Milan, and one of the spikes was in one of the churches there, supposed to be in one of the churches there, and for that was associated with with Jesus. And you like how I said associated, because I don't know what the right term is to how to talk about what happened.
Right, associated, yeah, that's fine.
But
reported to be associated.
Right. And so there's this guy. He's called the Naked Archaeologist, and he is a Jewish archaeologist that goes all over the world. He has a show that's on Amazon Prime, and he did this whole business about the crucifixion nails. And to be honest with you, the big appeal was because he was these crucifixion nails were focused on Caiaphas's grave.
Okay.
And
so Caiaphas is a high priest who was part of Jesus Christ's trial when he was sentenced.
Well, he was the head of the Sanhedrin. He's the head rabbi, but admittedly, probably in the top 3 coolest names of all times. Right, Caiaphas. Right, so that's this part of my passion is. Okay, so
to what extent do you care about the nails versus what extent do you just think Caiaphas is a cool name?
Well, I think both are equally, if not
compelling.
But I think that being such a cool name, the problem is that no one can name themselves Caiaphas because he's kind of responsible.
Yeah, the name comes with some historic baggage.
Right. I don't want to, like I said, I know that there's some question of whether it was Pontius or Caiaphas or the two of them. I don't know, and I'm not making a judgment or taking a position on anybody's responsibility in the whole affair.
Sure.
But because I don't know what the political lens is there. But how cool is the name Caiaphas? Let's just start off with that.
That's pretty cool. That's a cool name.
But nobody can be called Caiaphas or be named Caiaphas, otherwise you're associated with the business,
right,
of the crucifixion. So this guy, the Naked Archaeologist, he does an analysis of the Caiaphas tomb.
Okay.
And I think it's generally accepted that the tomb of Caiaphas that was excavated is the high priest and his son and the grandfather. And inside the Caiaphas box, and I don't know exactly what it's called, but the box
where they put the bones in. It's smaller than a coffin, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not I know it's called something, but so there's 2 crucifixion nails found inside the box.
Yeah.
Caiaphas's box. And it's odd. It's extraordinary for something like that to be in the box. But usually you place things like things that were important to the person in the box, right? So, there would be a little strip with a name, Caiaphas, in my box, because I think it's cool, right? So the challenge is that he asserts that these are the crucifixion nails, the Jesus nails.
Ossuary. That's the name of the box. An ossuary.
It's, like I said, you're the brains of the outfit.
Well, no, Google is the brains on that, but
Right. So I think that my question to you is, first of all, have you heard of this? Second of all, if you haven't,
Right.
What's the song dance on the crucifixion nails important? The importance of them with of finding them, because apparently these two nails now are in at a university in Israel.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of sitting there. So yeah, and I know that you're a Baptist, so you're not as passionate about the relic situation as maybe other parts of the Christian
other
faith,
parts of Christendom.
Yeah. I mean, I know that the Catholics got to, have a pretty decent situation with that. Then they have all of these rules, but I thought maybe we could do a real read in on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have heard of them, and I did catch at least part of that documentary. It seemed pretty fascinating. Looks to be relatively credible, like you said. Looks like the Caiaphas grave is fairly well documented when it was excavated, and it looks like it's fairly credible as to who he was. I think it was him and his son were buried in that tomb, and like you said, well documented. Pretty fascinating stuff. If the question, of course, is, are these nails used to crucify Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth? And that is an outstanding question, but like you say, the facts of the archaeology bear out to be pretty compelling, pretty interesting. And so naturally, a lot of questions surrounding that. What if? Who cares? What does that do for the faith? What are the ramifications for other faiths, right? How does it provide more legitimacy in the eyes of some if you find tangible archaeological evidence that can be traced back to a biblical event like the crucifixion of Jesus? Pretty interesting stuff. Like you said, I'm a Baptist. We're in the Protestant tradition, and not so much associated with the Catholic or the Catholic traditions in the way that we don't seek out. We don't pay attention, frankly, much to relics of biblical times or of saints. So maybe we'll have to have a Catholic friend on to do justice to that subject. But I can tell you from a Christian perspective, or at least a evangelical Protestant perspective, that there's always great interest in things that corroborate archaeological discoveries that corroborate the biblical narrative. People are always interested in that. As you know, there's now an entire museum, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. now, that is dedicated to the particular history of the Bible. They try to do a fairly, ecumenical presentation in that it's trying to appeal to Jewish and Christian history. And so they've got Jewish scrolls dating back, thousands of years, like physically in there, which is pretty remarkable. Some of the earliest segments from biblical manuscripts are in there. Now, sometimes you just have a piece of a page, but it's pretty remarkable stuff. So you move into these kind of relic kind of things, and that's pretty interesting. American evangelicals are always interested in things that corroborate the biblical narrative. But our counsel, typically, my counsel, is to hold those things lightly, right? They're interesting. They're worth documenting for sure. The tradition of any religion, that's worthwhile to keep and to study and consider what implications it might have.
From what I know is that I went to Marist College, which was a Catholic, college, and they had a piece of the finger of Saint Champagne, who's the guy, the French monk who helped found the Marist order. We're very pretty passionate about that finger, and but I know there's like second tier, third tier relics. That would be like of the person, a part or of the person, and then those associated by touching or interfacing with the person, and then those are artifacts that had touched the thing that touched the person, Right. And then there's things that have been blessed by the person. So I don't know all the hard fast rules, but from a historical, perspective, just having an artifact from the crucifixion, because as far as I know, the cross doesn't exist, right? Anymore. That's gone, right? If there was a cross, we know that something had happened. That was because you could crucify someone in many ways, but the cross doesn't exist. But if the nails were the actual nails,
right?
Then here's the other question: if there was matter on there from Jesus, DNA, and you were able to. This is a crazy question. You were able to.
This is the
use
sci-fi.
The DNA.
This is the sci-fi portion of our question.
To use the DNA to clone Jesus. Would that count as the not the resurrection?
The second coming.
Him coming. The second coming.
The second coming.
Would that count? And then what happens if you can make many of them?
Right. Yeah.
So where do you weigh in on that?
And to really mess with you, Christians believe that he was both fully God and fully man. So would the DNA cloning of him also be would he be just human, or would he be fully God as well?
And let me just say, this is not I'm not taking any positions on this.
No, definitely
and number one,
not.
Number two, this is not part of any theology from the Muslim community, nor do I speak for the Muslim community. But this is me specifically asking you, as we would do normally when I call you and be like, okay, what's going on with the Jesus nails? Do we know what's happening here? And I have a second thing to ask you, a second artifact. So
yeah, well, I think the caution that evangelical theologians provide American Christians is that we have to be really cautious, because in the Christian tradition, certainly Old Testament Jewish history, we know that humans are liable to seek out idols, basically inanimate objects, to care about more importantly than what we would believe, which is the text of Scripture and God. So to the extent that relics become objects of worship versus just of interest and archaeological collaboration, that to us is risky and damaging to the faith. Not to mention with initial reports, when these kinds of artifacts are brand new, it's hard to get a handle on what's truth and what's really fact-based. But it certainly does beg the question, and I'm always fascinated anytime artifacts from biblical history present themselves. And so I imagine you guys have some interesting artifacts from Islamic history as well, I presume.
Well, I mean, I think the statement that we have from the first statement is we're not big on necessarily artifacts so much as we are places of pilgrimage, right?
Okay.
So, and we're very careful about imagery, as everyone knows.
Right.
So the idea that there is no image, therefore, and there's that everything it leaves us in safe harbor way, because no one's gonna get no one's depicting the prophet and his family, peace be upon him and his family, and no one's gonna be doing that, especially. And it's not just is it Muhammad, it's any of the prophets that preceded Muhammad. So when you talk about that includes Hazrat Isa, who's Jesus, or Musa, which is Moses, and Ibrahim, Abraham. There's no imagery,
right?
And the idea is that once you start getting into dangerous waters, when people start interpreting the images of prophets. When it comes to artifacts, there's quite a few artifacts. My second question is about something very specific, but
okay.
If you go to Istanbul, and in Istanbul, there's the Ibrahim's bowl. One of his Abraham's bowl was there, which was which is in the museum in the Topkapi Palace, and that's one of the spoils of war from when Constantinople fell. But we're big on places of pilgrimage. So Mecca obviously is a place, and of course the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. But then you have some of the different places of pilgrimage for different sects within Islam, and it's not a homogeneous religion, right? So
right.
Shia 12ers, those that follow to the 12th Imam, are very passionate about Karbala, in Iraq, and that's a place of pilgrimage there, as in Ismaili, Cairo and Media, Cairo in Egypt, Media, which is where the Ismaili faith was founded, in Tunisia. Is a cool place. Medina, there's different places of pilgrimage, and then shrines, right?
Yeah.
there are bits and bobs there. I had a moment in time when I was in Istanbul, which I frequent quite often. I was walking through a doorway and I had this overwhelming feeling of something, and you can call it, a bad kebab, or you can say it was, divine intervention. But I had a moment where I said something strange is happening, and I spun around and I saw this little glass case right up to my waist. I look at it and I go, "What is this?" And there's this stick there that's about maybe 2 or 3 feet long. Mm-hmm. And there's all this Hebrew written on it, and I'm reading through what the little note on that says, "Oh, this is that," the little plaque, and it says that this is Moses' staff.
Wow.
What?
That's not nothing.
First of all, I'll be honest, a little disappointed because I'm in the Charlton Heston Moses camp where it's supposed to be like taller than.
It's like 8 feet tall.
Yeah. So right off the bat, I was skeptical because of my movie knowledge, Charlton Heston, where I'm saying clearly this can't possibly be. But sure enough, I did some research, and some pretty smart people, some nerds and some eggheads had done some research on this. They did PhDs and said this is most likely the staff. Mm-hmm. And so I was, I'm every time I go to Istanbul, I shouldn't say every time, but every third time I go to Istanbul, I'll pop in, and it's pretty awe-inspiring to have this. We have this connectivity to Moses' staff. Yeah. And which parted the seas, and turned into a snake, Right. So I don't know what the other powers are, but those, and it's the same thing in Islam. So
they say,
Musa is Moses,
Well, then that kind of doubly makes your museum visit interesting, because as they say, you walked past it. If it were a snake, it would have bit you. And you have a rod that may have once been a snake.
Yeah, no, I mean, admittedly so. I was taken a little bit back. I go, I don't know but it's really strange. It's through this doorway, so it's in the pillar of the doorway, and it's inset and then covered in glass. Yeah. So you could easily miss it. And there's a very famous picture. There's a very famous painting of the sacking of Constantinople by the Turks. And all of the relics of Christendom are sort of brought into the square, and there's this pile. And there's an inventory of them, and this is one of the things that's in the inventory.
Yeah.
So along with Ibrahim's bowl and a few other things going on there. And so it's kind of a sexy thing to go and visit. And then I don't know, again, where does this fall? I mean, what is, if you're able to handle the rod. Now, I'm not a prophet, beloved of God. So let's just say is there some business associated with the staff, or is it like a one and done? Like, it's out of energy now because Moses is the dude that could do it.
Right.
What's your take on that? Sorry.
Well, I think it's good. Well, I mean, I think that's your question strikes at the heart of why evangelical pastors will caution us against getting too attracted to relics, because for that very temptation is we're attracted to power, right? And we wonder if something like that, a relic, could turn into a good luck charm, if not by explicitly performing miracles. Like if you picked it up out of the glass case, like what would you be able to do with it? Would you be able to turn it into a snake? Well, of course, the biblical narrative has to do with God's power and God acting through Moses and through the staff. So even from, I think, an Orthodox reading of Scripture, we're not going to look at the staff as it happened to be the staff that had the power, right? Right. It was God was enabling Moses to use the staff to, make some points, both in front of Pharaoh and in front of the Jewish people. So, turning it into a snake, and then parting the Red Sea. But I will point out the whole staff thing is an allusion to the or kind of a reference and a foreshadowing of the whole shepherd office that we view Jesus as holding. So he was a shepherd, right? There's an infinite text of scripture talking about shepherd and Jesus being a shepherd that rescues the sheep. And as we know from the biblical text, Moses served about 40 years or something, a significant part of his adult life tending to sheep. So that's presumably where the staff came from, right? And so it was just in the context of demanding freedom for the Jewish people and then guiding them through the wilderness that it became all of a sudden not just a shepherd staff, but something that really played a role in the history of the Jewish people. So it's pretty remarkable to think anything of that antiquity still exists. Pretty remarkable stuff. I plead ignorance as far as the credibility of archaeological finds and stuff, but it's certainly anything and I imagine you may feel the same way from the Islamic text, but I think Christians in particular, they recognize that we believe the Bible to be God's word to man. We don't believe it to be a naturalistic history of Earth, but we do believe it to be a description of a historic relationship between God and man. And just for the sake, but either way you cut it, even if you don't believe that, clearly the Bible is a collection of ancient writings and documents. So anytime archaeology discovers something that corroborates, oh, well, these people actually were writing about something that we have found tangibly to exist, that's pretty interesting. And I think that helps, corroborate the authenticity of any historic document.
Yeah, no, in Psalm, the living word of Allah, of God, is in the Quran. It's a living, dynamic document, as if Allah is speaking, right? So, yeah. And so I think there's the same dynamic there when it comes to the Quran, and all the same stories are there. Moses, the flood, all this business, but it's a pretty amazing feat, and it's Googleable. Just Google, sure. The staff that for some of the spoils, and I think this is largely overlooked. Some of the spoils from the downfall, the fall of Constantinople are still there, and anyone can go and visit and see it. It's there's there's some kaftans there from the Prophet and his daughter and a few other places, Fatima, and so there's quite a few interesting relics in the Topkapi Palace, and I think they're all, like I said, they're all tied to a lot of them are tied to the taking or sacking of, and preserved because they were largely overlooked by the Islamic community over there. Yeah. And of course there's what I call the saddest building on the planet, which is the Hagia Sophia. Yeah. You can go through the Hagia Sophia and you can see where the emperors were crowned. Huh. And it's an amazing place, but the challenge is that it's not used for services. So you have the Blue Mosque that's a stone's throw away. Okay. And of course, before the Blue Mosque was built, the Hagia Sophia was used as a mosque. And there is the sort of running narrative that once a building is used as a mosque, you can't use it for any other intended purpose. Oh, which, I'm gonna.
Is that followed consistently, or is there varying degrees of application for that?
Well, let's just take read this just recently of what's going on. In Washington, D.C., right. A lot of the prayer spaces for Muslims are in churches. And that's because the multi-faith communities collaborate
right.
with each other.
And square footage is obnoxiously expensive in D.C.
And I think that That's true, and the challenge is, okay, there is a quite a bit of there's quite a strong narrative that says that non-Islamic places of worship, converting to mosque, cannot be used. They can't sort of retrograde back to that religion.
Interesting.
There is a narrative
Sure.
of this within Islam. The validity, I would question the validity of the reference points on that. So let's just start off with the holy day weekly in Islam is Friday. That's when you have Jummah prayer, and then you have the khutbah, which is I don't know what it's the homily, the sermon,
sure,
given by the imam. Right, that's Friday. On Sunday is, actually on Saturday is the holy day, right, for the Jewish community, right? And then you have Sunday, which is the holy day, right? So it's good, for Christians. So let's just start off with a practical element of the building's not being used,
right,
for the services on the same days, so there's no conflict right there. For all three Abrahamic faiths. So theoretically, they all could use the same space. Of course, there's got to be there's some practical elements. I think that in Christian faith, depending on which sect, you'd have to have an altar,
right?
Or you may or may not have an altar. You may or may not have to have a section for all the accoutrement. For the Eucharist, right?
Right.
Do you guys call it the Eucharist?
We do, not commonly, but we call it the Lord's Supper.
Okay.
It's more traditionally within the evangelical context. We call it the Lord's Supper.
Okay, so I know that
we definitely we understand it differently than Catholics do.
Right.
To be certain.
And the Eastern Orthodox, they have there's only natural light and candles. There's no electricity in the church. So I'm sure there's some logistical stuff like there.
Sure.
But I don't think. I just feel like that building there should be, they should allow some church services there. Why not? And I think that. There is precedent when it comes to areas where there's been Muslim immigration, where buildings have been changed, and when there's been Muslim immigration where they've left, that there's been buildings that have been converted back.
Yeah.
I think that the justifications within Islam are kind of questionable, and highly questionable, and it comes from really an interpretation that is very, very rigid rather than multi-faith and engaging which is the true purpose of Islam. And I think that and that's part of the struggle within the community right now is dealing with extremist groups that might claim to be Muslim or are Muslim, but are looking at a very rigid line in interpretation. But I went to the Hagia Sophia, and I couldn't. The building was so sad.
Yeah.
It was, and if it was one of those things where I just go, why don't we just let, why doesn't the Turkish government, why don't they just kind of, and I'm not advocating I'm not advocating hard for this, but just saying,
it's a fair question.
I just feel like there's no reason, particularly the Blue Mosque is right there. They're not doing anything. It's on Fridays. There's no Jummah prayer. And if there was, no big deal. Yeah. But it's now looked at as sort of like a museum piece. And that building was the center of the Eastern Empire.
Wow.
And, coronated, emperors for the Byzantine Empire for all that time. And it just, you pop a few services in there on Sunday. What would be the problem?
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Well, on the flip side, speaking of DC and churches, we have an issue where a lot of the churches, the congregations who own church buildings in DC have kind of withered away, and so you have some beautiful church buildings being converted into condominiums.
Right. Yeah. No.
So I mean, we have no theological objection to that or implications like Islam may. It saddens people. It's sad that buildings that were once used to gather for the worship of God are now not being used. Not to say housing is not important or not worthwhile, but it's kind of sad. The end of the new era. But then, Christians can recognize also in that it reminds us that the church, quote unquote, theologically speaking, it's the gathered people, right? It's the people of God gathered together. That's the church. And for us, it doesn't matter what building we are in. My Baptist church in D.C. was meeting in a public high school, for example. So we're frequently reminded that the church, quote unquote, is the people. We call church buildings churches for shorthand, and it's common enough parlance that we just kind of sometimes forget the demarcation. But we have those conversations too.
Yeah, and I mean there is and I want to make the distinction. There's a distinction between a prayer room and a mosque, obviously, or a masjid. There's a distinction there, and I get that. I'm not a religious scholar, so I'm not gonna try to interpret religious texts nor Islam, but the difference between a prayer room could be anywhere. A mosque is a holy place of worship for the community, for the ummah. So I understand there's nuances there, but I understand, and it was converted in the 30s, the Hagia Sophia, to a museum. But I think that it would be what a great interfaith, multi-faith gesture to have a service every Sunday there, and have some Eastern Orthodox priests, fathers would rock in there and with the incense and a few peeps. And I think it would be a wonderful multi-faith gesture by the Turkish government for the global multi-faith community as saying, hey, look, we're all about this. We're living in the same neighborhood, and we're all Abrahamic. Yeah. So why can't we just acknowledge not only that we're here, but that this place has significance in the Eastern Orthodox tradition specifically. And as a nod to the Eastern Orthodox community, let's do something like that. I mean, I'm not saying that we rock in there with, the 200 or 300 plus different sects of Christianity and say let's, I don't even know what that would look like. But for the Eastern Orthodox tradition, I think that having some of those guys that rock in there and conduct their Sunday mass would be the building would be a lot less sadder.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There'd be some life in it, right? And presumably you would have to think that would be fruitful and provide some dividends in the context of multi-faith relationships, right?
Just from a diplomatic
reasons. That would be. It would have to, I don't know, release some of the tension.
Well, here's the other thing: the building's not going anywhere,
right?
And I think the donations. That's number one. Number two is I think the donations to restore the building would probably go up.
Right.
Especially once you do something around Christmas.
Right.
Which the Eastern Orthodox Christmas is different than the regular Christmas. So you pop that, I think people would I think there would be a great subsidy.
Right.
From a practical
when people are using a building and they tend to want to take care of it. John and I launched this podcast because we think it's an opportunity to show a unique friendship and have some interesting conversations with our friends. We invite you to join us. If you like the show and would like to explore sponsorship opportunities, contact me on Twitter at mthawk or on the web at crossingfaiths.fireside.fm.
So what are the places of pilgrimage for the Baptists? Because we got the Hagia Sophia we're talking about in Islam. We obviously have Mecca, the Kaaba, right? And Medina and a few other Karbala. So is it Southern Baptists besides Jerusalem? I'm pulling that out. So maybe not in Jerusalem. Where do you go? Is it the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? Is that
I haven't been yet, but yeah, I understand that's a big deal. A lot of Christians like to walk the Via Dolorosa, which is the path that Christ walked on the way
Mount
to
Olives all the way down.
Yeah, Mount of Olives,
Palm Sunday, right?
Like all those New Testament and Old Testament locations, man, they're all over it. And I know from Christian friends who've visited, like it just gives them a really, really high appreciation. They feel more connected to the ancient text in a way that they didn't before they went. So when you can see all those landscapes that are, told about in the Bible, it's pretty powerful stuff. And I think too, it gives people a tangible experience because, when you're reading a text or any book, you're kind of left up to your imagination. And so when they see like how close all of these geographical markers are, right, they just see how close everything is, then that sits with people, and they can kind of have, when they go back and read the scripture, they're like, oh, I've been there, like I know what this looks like, and so they can kind of the text informs them in their mind's eye in a way that they hadn't before. That's a pretty significant experience. Otherwise, Southern Baptist ventures, pilgrimages, include basically probably Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was like, where isn't it? It's like, isn't it Nashville or isn't it?
It's basically Nashville. We do have a quote unquote pilgrimage every year, in which the annual meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention happens, and but that's in a different city every year that rotates from city to city. I recently returned from it. 2019 was in Birmingham, Alabama, so about 8,000, a little over 8,000. What we call messengers from Southern Baptist churches gathered and did a mix of business and voting and music and worship and preaching.
Because see, Catholics are easy because you've got Vatican City, you've got all these churches that have significance.
Right.
Same thing with Eastern Orthodox. You go to Russia, you go into whether it's the Russian Orthodox Church or whether it's the Greek Orthodox Church. They have their shrines, they have their churches, and that's not to I'm not devaluing it. I'm saying it's easy. You can you can Google it, boom. So when it comes to the Baptists, I'm just kind of so is it a church? Is it a person? Is it a rock? Is it a like is it like meet me under the so and so tree? Yeah. No, I'm not trying to. I just don't know.
It's potluck dinners for us, frankly.
No, really? The Mormons, they have Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And then I went to school in Vermont, and they had the birthplace of Joe Smith.
Yeah. Yeah. The significant locations for Baptists, and I think a lot of evangelicals, they tend to be, say, the churches of prominent historic pastors. So Spurgeon was a pastor in the UK, and I know a lot of people go there and like to go to see his old church. John Leland was a Baptist itinerant minister around the time of America's founding. So he has a burial place, and there's a spot that is reported to be a spot where he and James Madison had some important conversations about religious freedom, and John Leland kind of used his community, kind of his public influence to sway Virginia voters to ratify the Constitution. And so like there's a marker in I think it's like Culpeper, Virginia. There's a little marker that's reportedly where this some of this exchange happened. So there are places like that have significance that are interesting for people to go to. But predominantly, those are pastors when they're on vacation, they might try to hit up those kinds of spots.
Huh. Okay. I mean, I was very lucky to be a guest of the Israeli government in November of last year, and I went to Israel for the first time, and I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and there was a lot of business there. There was a lot of movement. There was a lot of people. There was a lot of stuff going on, and it was wonderful to be at the Dome of the Rock and the Alexa Mosque up there, and Salat out with the go to Juma prayer and Fajr and the morning prayers and stuff like that. Although everybody wanted to do Tahajjud, which is going there about an hour and a half before and going through a prayer cycle. And for we're supposed there's 5 prayer times, depending on which sect of Islam you're in, is 5 or 3, depending on which sect you're from. But it's predominantly a Sunni community there. So we were doing the Fajr prayer, but we were doing Tahajjud first. And so Fajr prayer is it's just before sun up, right?
Okay.
So there's it's like 4 a.m. and we're getting up at 3 to do extra prayers. And it was a lot.
Sure.
But we were doing that, and then of course we were there, and some people wanted to wait for the sunrise, and then other people wanted to do this, and I'm passionate about breakfast, and the problem is I get halfway through a meal, I start thinking, okay, breakfast, okay, what am I doing for lunch?
Right.
So
you and me both.
so that's one of my problem. But so we had a wonderful experience there. But one of the interesting experiences that I had was when I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I was with some of my Ismaili sisters, and it's called Barakah, which is like spiritualism, energy, that type of thing, something that you absorb and feel and interact with as being a spiritual person, right?
Yeah.
In the Muslim world. And the death slab, again, I don't know what it's called, but the bearers. So they pulled Hazrat Isa off the cross, and they laid him out on this stone, and I guess washed them and did a whole bunch and wrapped them up and stuff. Yeah. That's in the Church of Holy Sepulchre, and there was a little bit of a moment there. And for different traditions in Islam have different attachments to Hazrat Isa. And I always used to say when I did a cultural competency training, I used to teach at the Foreign Service Institute for 3 years and teach Islam in a X context, so an Afghan context or Iraqi context. And I always used to get questions about where, how do we talk with the Muslim community from the Christian, government workers that were going out there, and so diplomats, all the way from diplomats to just to foreign service officers would go through my training, and army and military guys. And I'd say, well, just stick with Hazrat Isa, stick with Jesus. He does the same thing in Islam. He's coming back at the end of days, and to open up a can on the Dajjal, which is the Antichrist. And it's all the same. It's just all the same business, right?
Someday, John, I'm just gonna listen to you talk eschatology. With your New York your lingo.
I don't
open up a can on the Antichrist, like that. I want to hear the whole story with that.
You want
that perspective.
First the earth cooled, then the dinosaurs came, and now okay.
Remind me what part of New York did you grow up in?
So the family, is originally from the city, and then everybody moved upstate to a place called Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
And while the family was still migrating back and forth, the family were spending time with the family in the Bronx, but that's where the family's Hawkins from the Bronx, from 187 Katona, back in the day. So it'd
be the first book, the first Bronx, first and second Bronx. You could, it'd be your translation of end times.
Listen, I'll be honest with you. As a New Yorker, you don't want to. What's the thing called? What's it? It's the rapture. You don't want to get raptured. Right.
You don't want to get raptured.
No, you want to get down and dirty, because you're gonna be able to split some heads with Hazrat Isa. You know what I mean? Like,
you just want to be part of the revolution, John.
Yeah, listen,
the end times apocalyptic revolution.
Listen, the rage that's in these puppies. You know what I mean? Like, I just figure that I've got my fists going. I'm like, I think he's going to need some help from some New Yorkers. So let's rapture out the guys that are not going to fight, and the rest of us are here. We're ready. We're ready for it.
That's funny.
You're like that's part of the Baptist tradition, the rapture, right? You guys are gonna.
Baptists are split on the end time stuff. It's in a category.
Well, and for those who are listening, the rapture is like right before the end, the end days.
Right.
There's belief system that the people will disappear and go to heaven. The good people will go to heaven, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. The elect, the people who have been saved, go to heaven.
Right.
And everybody else is down here. So the idea is that I think the people who are left after the rapture, there are still opportunities for them to find salvation in Christ, but life is going to be miserable. So, but it's in the category of end time stuff where Christians could be a part of the same church and brothers and sisters of the faith and disagree on their interpretation of end times scripture.
Okay.
So the word rapture, the word rapture is actually not in the Bible, but maybe we could talk about that another time.
Sure.
Bring an expert on or something. But I will say one, as we were talking about places of pilgrimage. I know one for Protestant Christians, one hub of interest is Geneva, Switzerland. It's where John Calvin, who's a Protestant reformer and theologian, a lot of Reformation history when we rebellious people were splitting from the Catholic Church. There's a lot of rich history in Geneva, and so you have things like, you literally have John Calvin's chair in his church where you can go look at it. I'm not sure if it's permitted to sit in it, but I know my parents have been there. And then there's a statue, there's a monument. It's not so much a historic relic, obviously, but there's a statue of like four actually more Reformed characters from John Calvin and John Knox and Theodore Beza. So that I know is a popular pilgrimage for a lot of people.
Okay, so are you aware of the Reformed Roasters?
The Reformed Roasters? What is this?
Are you going to Google it? So this is like, okay, you need to Google this because it's like whenever I think of Calvinism now, all I think of is Reformed Roasters, which is like this. It's different. It's different coffee.
It's coffee. All right.
It's coffee that is it's masterfully roasted to the glory of the one Most High.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they have total depravity blend. They have limited atonement.
I see,
which is, I guess,
now.
So I don't where does this sit? I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, all I know is it's hilarious.
That's amazing.
They have heresy coffee.
Limited atonement, the roast. Limited atonement ? Yes. Limited flavor? No way.
So, I mean, these guys should be sponsoring this podcast because we're giving them this plug. Absolutely. That's number one. Number two, I mean, I'm sitting here going, or at least send us some free coffee. But I think they have Calvin drinking a shot of coffee on his thing on each.
Yeah, look at that.
So,
yeah.
I mean, so I don't know. So
that's great. Well, all my Reformed friends and people who aren't but understand it, the slogan is "Coffee that chooses you."
Right.
which gets into Reformed theology for those who aren't familiar. The idea is that God chooses the elect in advance of us choosing him. So that's also a deep in the weeds theological issue that we don't have time for today, but that's pretty funny.
So sorry, this is the problem. I mean,
it's the
as a scholar, as somebody who studied religion in college and all this other stuff, I think about. But the problem is that. I say it gets worse, meaning the product labeling. Coffee that chooses you, total depravity blend, quote, because men love the dark roast. Listen, it's not an endorsement of the product. I've never tasted it.
I certainly have not tried it, so I can't speak. We're you and I are both coffee snobs.
Yeah, definitely. You know how we, as a New Yorker, it just is what it. But now, anytime, because as a religious scholar, somebody who studied religion, went through all this stuff, it's just ridiculous that when you say John Calvin, all I think about is this. This is the first thing that comes to my mind. Is this image of him drinking coffee from this guy? And like I said, it might be great coffee. I don't know. Yeah. And it'd be really great if they sponsor the podcast.
Yeah, they should sponsor the podcast. We'll talk about them more often. They have limited atonement roast, irresistible grace roast, unconditional election roast.
Right. So anyway, so you didn't know about this?
I did not know about this. I'm just learning of this.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I just Most High Coffee, ordained and directed the directive, so I don't know.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah, no. So what about you? With where have you been when you've sat down and all of a sudden you see an artifact that you didn't know, or that existed, or you've been out and about, and all of a sudden you're have you ever encountered anything like that in your travels?
Gosh, I can't think of anything like. Well, not that like snuck up on me like that surprised me like the Moses staff for you, but going to went to Paris one time and went to Notre Dame, and that was pretty powerful. It's a pretty significant building, that sadly is experienced that fire. So I hope they rebuild it, but clearly has a lot of deferred maintenance on it. So that was a pretty powerful statement. I haven't really gone to a lot of historic sites, but the collection at the Museum of the Bible, like. They've got just a wall of historic scrolls, and just being around that many is pretty powerful. And to look at ancient manuscripts that were written in early first 2 to 4 centuries of history of new millennium. Pretty palpable to be there, and you just can feel like more of a connection to our forebears.
Yeah, I've never been to Notre Dame Cathedral. I've been to quite a few. When I was in Russia, I spent time studying Russia in the first part of my career in Russia, and some of the churches over there are just but they do a really good job at creating that sort of that feeling, because there's only natural light and candles. Right. They have the iconography. They're burning just a ton of incense. And or I'm trying to think of what I don't know which one is burnt, frankincense or myrrh. Which one is
certainly frankincense. I don't know. I'm less familiar with myrrh, but certainly frankincense.
Yeah, frankincense. And so they're so you walk in and it's there's as a Muslim it's still. I always kind of joke with people, because when I would sit with would go and salat out with the mama in the prayer room, there would be some nahari or some Asian food, right? That's Afghan or Pakistani, Central Asian food be cooking, and so you'd have the taste of sweetmeats and kofta and all kinds of other stuff, and then we'd go into the prayer room and we'd salat out, and of course we'd have the incense and everything else. We'd come out of the prayer room, and I'd have to change, because I'd be smelling my clothes, and I smell like dinner and prayer. And I always would joke that I smell like Islam. There's always a type of a mixture of smells that come out of an Afghan house, and so it's. I think that there's something to do, there's something to the idea of creating the atmosphere of, with the incense and this and that and everything else. And the Eastern Orthodox Church is really good with that.
No, yeah. I can only imagine the aesthetic experience of those smells and the lighting and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So, what else we have on the agenda? What else what burning desires do you have today?
I don't know. I think we're up against the time, man.
Are we?
Yeah.
We should, do a shout out to our listeners, just ask them, what is hot, what's sexy to them that they want us to talk about, that we can, between the two of us, we can offer at least 6 or 7 opinions between the two of us. But
we can shoot from the hip all day long, whether or not it's credible. That's
right. Yeah. I mean, I always say I'm not taking any positions, and I'm not sure I know what I'm talking about. But the other side of it is that we can bring in experts. We can bring in as many people as we need to bring in to discuss the issues, and we're happy to do so.
This has been Crossing Phase with John Pinna and Matt Hawkins, a podcast of Rolltop Productions. You can continue the conversation with us if you dare on Twitter via @MTHawk or @JTPinna. Love it or hate it, we'd appreciate your review of our program wherever you glean your favorite podcasts, especially in the iTunes Store. Sponsorships are available for Crossing Phase podcast, big or small. If you'd like to explore what a sponsorship might look like, just reach out to me on Twitter @MTHawk or through crossingphase.fireside.fm. Music for this episode is by Scott Buckley via scottbuckley.com.au, and we proudly host Crossing Phase on the Fireside.fm podcast platform.
there's a reason why this is a podcast, because I have a face for radio, certainly not for television.
Well, I wasn't going to say it, John, but
It's true. Yeah, it's true. It is what it is. So, we have to sometimes just accept who we are. So.
You rock the beard better than I can. No question.
Well, yeah. I mean,
it would take me a year to do what you accomplish.
I appreciate that. I wish that there was some money in the beard, but right. There's it. So, but in any event, like I said, appreciate your time, Matthew, and there's these conversations that we've had over the years. Hopefully, there's our listeners appreciate them, and we can help ourselves and work with the community to help the multi-faith community come closer together.
I appreciate it. Thanks for your time, John.